Recording in progress.
Hello, my name is Eli Williams, and I'm up here today to introduce Dr. Abby Ocobock. Abby is a professor of sociology and gender studies at the University of Notre Dame, where she teaches classes about families, sexualities, and gender. She has been researching and writing about same-sex marriage for over a decade. Her book, Marriage Material: How an Enduring Institution is Changing Same-Sex Relationships, was published a few months ago by University of Chicago Press. Abby's work has been published in the American Journal of Sociology, the Journal of Marriage and Family, and Current Sociology, and featured in popular outlets like The Atlantic, Slate Magazine, and The Daily Beast. Abby was my advisor during my PhD program in sociology at Notre Dame. In the acknowledgments of my dissertation, I wrote, "My mentor and dissertation chair, Abby Ocobock, played a crucial role in my education. She read countless drafts, encouraged me, pushed me, and never let me quit on myself or the project. Her contribution to this dissertation has been immense and meaningful." What that basically means is that I cried in her office more than once. But for real, Abby helped me survive grad school and encouraged my growth as a person and a scholar. I did want to say one thing before bringing Abby up here. As Unitarian Universalists, we are affirming of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, and queer people. The Unitarian Universalist Association website reads, quote, "Each of us has worth and dignity, and that worth includes our gender and sexuality. As Unitarian Universalists, we not only open our doors to people of all sexual orientations and gender identities, we value diversity of sexuality and gender and see it as a spiritual gift. We create inclusive religious communities and work for LGBTQ justice and equity as a core part of who we are. All of who you are is sacred. All of who you are is welcome," end quote. So it is fitting we will be hearing research on LGBTQ plus experiences here today. These are conversations we must have often in our church community. Abby's scholarship, which illustrates the complex humanity of LGBTQ plus people, is in line with our values as Unitarian Universalists. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Abby Ocobock.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Eli, for that introduction. Thanks, Megan, for all the organizing. Okay, so I'm really excited to be here, a little nervous, but thanks for having me. So let me start by asking you to think about which same-sex couples are likely to be getting engaged to marry this Valentine's Day and why. So at first, the answer might seem obvious. Whomever happens to be in a loving, committed relationship and who wants to seize Valentine's Day as an opportunity to be romantic. Last year, that might have been true. This year, a decent proportion of the same-sex couples getting engaged on Valentine's Day are likely to be doing it prematurely or grudgingly. They are scared that marriage rights might be taken away under this new presidency. Those couples who want to get married and who've already been working towards it will likely speed up the decision. Not totally sure already, but better now than never. Those who don't want to get married might do it anyway because they know how many rights and protections depend on it. Better safe than sorry. So thinking about what to say today, it really struck me how quickly social change happens. So had I been stood up here a year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, I probably would have opted to talk about something different. The pace of change surrounding same-sex marriage is really fast, but it's always been fast. That's nothing new. So I interviewed 116 of the first lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people to gain access to legal marriage in the US. They gain access to it in their home state of Massachusetts, which, as Megan said, was the first state to make same-sex marriage legal in the US. It went into effect in 2004. They were trailblazers. They were both experiencing and contributing to momentous and rapid social change. And for a while, it was really hard to keep up with how quickly legal marriage was being introduced across the states and then nationwide, and how quickly attitudes were changing. But now it's 20 years later since it became first legal anywhere in the US. And new cohorts of LGBTQ individuals have been born, grown up, started to date, knowing nothing other than the ability to legally marry the person they love. Legal marriage has become the lay of the land, both legally and culturally. And then just think about what's happened over the last month or so. Lawyers have started issuing warnings to same-sex couples to prepare for the possible loss of rights again. The Idaho House just passed a resolution calling on the Supreme Court to reconsider its decision on same-sex marriage equality. And I hate to sound negative, but I'm pretty sure other states will likely follow. So quickly, we are back to living in uncertain times. So, what do I want to talk about today? Given this, I really want to use today to reflect on what I've learned from my own research about how we can be resilient in these uncertain times, what matters, what helps. And most of all, I really want to stress the importance of diversity and pluralism as a source of resilience. So marginalized groups are often lumped together by outsiders, but hopefully this isn't news to you that LGBTQ plus people are a really diverse group. They think about love, commitment, and marriage in a multitude of ways. They've gained access to legal marriage at different life and relationship stages, and therefore they experience it in really varied ways. And we can gain insights from thinking about those differences. So what I want to do is tell you about the very different marriage experiences of 3 groups of LGBTQ plus people in my research, and then get back to that important theme of pluralism and how it connects to being in a UU church. So some LGBTQ plus people, whom I call marriage embracers, had formed committed relationships long before legal marriage was possible. They did not expect to gain access to legal marriage in their lifetimes. They still embraced the value of marriage. They found ways to embrace in marriage like experiences like civil unions, domestic partnerships, commitment ceremonies, holy unions in their churches. And once marriage became legally available to them, they seized the opportunity to add on that legal commitment to the marriage-like relationships that they'd already formed, knowing that it would help them to gain social legitimacy, family status, rights, and protections. But they resisted any notion that only now they were really married, perceiving that what makes a marriage is the love and commitment they'd already built themselves together and with their communities, not government validity. Once they had access to legal marriage, they built do-it-yourself marriages. They creatively and selectively agreed only to the parts of marriage that they felt applied to their very long, already existing relationships. There was no need for another marriage proposal. Those were for much less secure couples. There was no need for a big, elaborate wedding. Hadn't they already demonstrated their commitment enough? There was no need to vow to do monogamy. Who would want to commit to that for life? They were committed to attending to one another's changing needs instead. Okay, another group of LGBTQ plus people, whom I call marriage rejectors, were disinterested in marriage, even very critical of it. Their historic exclusion from the institution and exposure to varying forms of radical queer politics meant they had little interest in participating in any form of marriage. Nonetheless, surprisingly, over time, over the last 20 years, many marriage rejectors have ended up legally marrying or admitting to me that they were likely to do so at some point in the future, but insisted that this was only for practical reasons, to gain some very important benefit, like health insurance. So when a particular need arose, they would enter marriage with as little fuss and fanfare as possible, and continue to try and critique the institution from within. They refuse to see marriage as relevant for their love and commitment, and they continue to encourage the LGBTQ plus community to value all kinds of families and relationships equally. Lastly, let me introduce you to a group of LGBTQ plus people that I call marriage assumers. These were predominantly young LGBTQ plus people, typically in their 20s or 30s. They had entered their first serious same-sex relationships only after marriage had already become legal. They had grown up with legal marriage always as an option. They took it for granted as just what you do. When you love someone, you're committed to them and you want to have children with them, though they could not usually articulate why. From incredibly early in their relationships, first dates even, they saw themselves as working toward marriage. They described interest in marriage as part of a checklist to go through with potential new partners, along with whether they had any criminal background. They found it difficult to envisage long-term committed relationships in the absence of marriage, nor saw little point in investing in relationships that were not, quote, marriage material. If they felt insecure about the potential for marriage, conflict was high and relationship dissolution likely. Other parts of their relationships and lives were evaluated through the lens of marriage. Were they compatible enough with their partners for marriage? Were their careers and lives stable enough for marriage? Everything else had become part of a broad marital master plan. So it's these young marriage assumers I keep thinking about and worrying about now that marriage rights feel under threat again. When we talk about revoking same-sex marriage rights, for this younger cohort, we're not just talking about losing rights, protections, benefits, nor are we even, unfortunately, just talking about equality and justice. We're talking about aspirations, dreams, life plans. Marriage rights for them constitute the taken for granted stuff of what people are able to conceive as possible for their relationships and life. I often hear people talk about marriage rights as if they're still a relatively new thing for the same-sex community, something that same-sex couples only recently gained access to. But just for a moment, imagine telling the average 20-year-old heterosexual that their marriage rights were going to be taken away, that the thing they'd always imagined being able to do, had planned their future around, was now suddenly not an option. For this group of marriage assumers, that's what we're talking about when we talk about the possible loss of marriage rights. So how can we help LGBTQ people in the face of such uncertainty? Well, here I hope maybe that I'm preaching to the choir, because the thing that I think will really help happens to be something that Unitarian Universalists are already committed to and believe in, a commitment to pluralism. Now, I'm not a member of a UU church, so I did a little bit of research. Eli suggested that I do a little bit of research into what it means to be UU. And I was really heartened to see pluralism listed as a core value. At its simplest, pluralism assumes that diversity is beneficial to society. In the context of a church like this, it allows for religious pluralism. But it also means much more. It means embracing a diversity of beliefs, experiences, and identities as a source of strength, rather than division. It means making space for all ways of loving and doing family life. It's about respecting the ways members of minority groups build and maintain their own cultural traditions. So when I compare the different marriage experiences of people who took part in my research, the importance of pluralism becomes abundantly clear. I worry about younger LGBTQ plus people in part because compared to other groups, they seem less able to imagine a broad range of possibilities for love, commitment, security, and family life. There was only one option: legal marriage. And let me be clear, the same is likely true for most heterosexuals. But unfortunately, this means that if marriage rights are at risk, the loss feels insurmountable. But this reliance on one family form has not historically been true for the LGBTQ+ community, who have long modeled the importance of making diverse relationships and families visible, respected, and valued. We stand to gain a lot by learning from our LGBTQ+ elders, who often, whether by necessity or choice, have so much more experience living and loving in a broad range of ways. So, with pluralism as a core value, the UU Church can play a role by sincerely and joyfully sharing and celebrating as many role models for love and commitment in your communities as possible. And I just want to say that this does not mean devaluing marriage. Marriage will continue to matter in a lot of ways to a lot of people, not least because it's central to their faith. But there are lots of ways to be married, and marriage is only one way to love and commit. So by emphasizing pluralism, we send a strong message that neither the government nor the courts can take love and commitment away from us. We can support LGBTQ+ inclusion by rejecting rigid dogma and embracing love for all, whatever form it takes. Thank you.